So now we're beginning texturing. We need to make sure that the checker pattern that we assign to this particular object does not stretch. Okay, now you could see that the square shape on this particular object is more of a rectangular shape, whereas this one is really stretched. If I assigned a grass material or any other material to this particular object, you're going to see that it's not going to look really nice. So the first step is to right mouse click and hold, assign new material. We'll go to Maya and we click on Lambert and we click on the checkered button. Okay, so just like we had before, this particular Lambert is not going to be our final texture, and since it is relatively a flat surface, I'm going to use a technique called planar mapping. So I'll go to UV, planar option box, and we want to assign a planar map not from the x-axis or from the z-axis, but we want to assign it from the y-axis, which is the green arrow going straight down. If I try to assign the planar map to the x-axis and click apply, you can see that this particular mesh is like really bad. It doesn't even look like checker pattern anymore. If I zoom in really close, you're gonna see this like border, this like really long rectangle, and it extends to both sides of the geometry. Okay, and if I clicked on the geometry and clicked on the z-axis and clicked apply, it's going to do the same exact thing. It's going to take that same border and it's going to wrap it around the z-axis. But again, what we're trying to accomplish is getting a perfectly square checker pattern on this polygon plane. So we're going to use a y-axis and click project. When I click project, it closes that. Okay, nice. So that looks more of a square pattern to me than projecting in the z or the x-axis. And if I wanted to, let's say, maybe change the shape of this pattern so that it didn't look so much like an oval, on the edges of your polygon plane, you have like these borders here. They're found on all sides, okay? They're on all sides of this particular object. All the way over here, and then right there. I'm not going to change the size of the squares in my perspective view, but I'm just going to go to object mode, click on this object, and then go to UV and UV editor. Alright, now in my UV editor, I'll explain the UV toolkit. This is actually a really essential part to our texturing. But what we're trying to do is we're taking this pattern, and let me turn off the checkered image underneath, and this is what we have. This particular shape is the same shape that we see in here. If I click on the mountain shape and then look at it in my UV editor, my mountains don't look anything like this shape, and therefore if I were to assign a checker pattern to it, so right mouse click and hold, assign existing material, Lambert 3, you can see that that checker pattern is like all over the place. So what does it mean when that checker pattern looks like this? It doesn't look like a perfect square. It means that if I assign any material to this object, it's going to be stretched. Okay? So let me just press undo and continue to click on this guy. So what we have to do in our UV editor is right mouse click and hold, and I'm going to click on shell. So as I click on my shell, I can press R, which is a scale tool, and I'm going to make my UV editor really small so you can see exactly how scaling my UV is going to influence the texture pattern on here. So if I scale it to the right, you guys can see that that pattern gets squished or stretched. Okay, it gets squished or stretched. So what I'm trying to do is scale it to a point where these square patterns are going to be square and not rectangular. Okay, once I have that, I'm going to scale it universally and make sure that it fits within this quadrant. Okay. So now that I've properly UV'd my terrain, I'm going to go to object mode. Okay. I'm going to right mouse click and hold and go to assign existing material, which is Lambert 1. And now this particular terrain is ready to be textured in Mudbox. Alright, texturing and sculpting, there are far superior programs out there other than Mudbox, but since Mudbox is free, we have a 3-year student license, this is what we're going to use. Ideally, I would say Mari or any of these Substance Painter packages, the algorithmic Substance Painter, would be perfect. But if you're balling on a budget, then we're using Mudbox. So I'll take this object, I'll click File, Send to Mudbox as New Scene. And so if there's ever anything wrong with your geometry in Mudbox, in Maya, it will let you know in Mudbox. So the fact that we don't have a screen that's highlighting anything that's red, then we're pretty good. So you navigate through Mudbox the same way you would navigate through Maya. Okay, if I press W, I can see the wireframe. Alright, so if I press W, I can see a wireframe on this object, which helps me out. And by default, you can see that it has this specularity to it. So any object that I bring into Mudbox, immediately the first thing I want to do is right mouse click and hold and find the word edit material. And I change the specular color to black. That means it's not reflecting any light. Okay. So I know that my what would you call it? My rocket ship is in this region here. So I'm going to start with reviewing some of the tools that we have in Mudbox. You have a paint tool. Alright, so paint tools. You have a paintbrush, projection, eyedrop. I'm not going to go through all of them. I'll just go over the ones that I really think that you would need. And that's a projection brush. Okay, the projection brush is so cool. I love that brush. It's amazing. On the upper right hand corner, you have different layers. So if we were adding if we were going to add more detail, maybe we want to add cracks in the terrain, we would use a sculpting layer, and that has a set of tools that are allocated just for sculpting. But since we're painting, we're going to go into the paint layers. So I'll click on this little icon here. It says new layer. Oops, sorry, paint. And click on new layer, and I get this paint layer. We're going to rename this to terrain, and the size, I'll make it a 2K image. And the channel, you have lots of different channels. The diffuse means the color. The specular means the light reflected off of it, and so on and so forth. So we'll click on diffuse and we'll press OK. Alright, so it says the projection brush is designed to work with a stencil. Please select a stencil. So these are our stencils. You have what they call alpha channels, which are black and white, and these are primarily used for specularity. You have all of these different channels, right? These are pretty cool. You got animal skin, you got whale fat, you got, you know, all this crazy stuff, right? No, you don't have whale fat. I was just joking. It was a joke. All right, you have bricks, you have animal fur, you have grass. You can even upload pictures. So let's say we wanted dirt, a dirt texture. I'm going to go to one of my favorite websites, Google, and type in dirt texture map. Alright, I'll also just kind of show you Quixel. They have a tremendous library of assets. Each one of these particular texture files, it comes with a displacement map, a bump map, all of those things. You can use Quixel library. You have to subscribe. It costs a little bit of money, but it's worth it. But let's just go to something free. I'll click on images and I'll click on dirt texture map. Let's just type in dirt texture. Okay. So I'll use, let's see, let's find, I'll click on this one. And then I'll right mouse click and hold and find the word save image as. I'll save this on my desktop. Animation 1, spaceship. It's always good to put textures in your source images folder. So dirt texture. Save. There we go. So now if I click on this guy, go to add stencil. I'll find my folder and grab the dirt texture and press open. And that dirt texture, it will open underneath your stencils tab all the way to the right. Okay, cool. So you can see, like, as I'm navigating around, that stencil stays in the same place. All right, which, you know, is fine for me. So I'm going to look at this terrain up close. So I can zoom in, or I can zoom out, or it tells me how to move the stencil, how to rotate, and how to scale the stencil, and how to hide. If I press and hold S, right mouse click and hold, it's going to scale the stencil. So I'm going to move the stencil right here. Oops. If I, let's see, in the right side, it says use tiles. So now it's actually going to repeat this. So watch, I'm clicking, and this is actually a really good texture because it's a seamless texture, which means that it's going to repeat at the edges. Okay, if I turn off the use tiles, then that means I'll have to hold S, move this texture to the left side of my screen, paint, and it stops right there at the edge. I have to move it here, paint. And all depending on how close we are going to be to our geometry, right? I'm going to press Q to hide that stencil. I'll press W to hide the texture. I know that my camera, and let me change cameras because I feel like this camera is slightly rotated. So I'll right mouse click on the perspective and look through. Okay, there we go. Alright. So I know this camera is going to be somewhere about like at this angle. So I don't want to find a really pixelated image because then it's just not going to look as nice. So the question is, how do you get a really great quality image and avoid having, you know, pixelation in this particular texture? All right, so let me zoom in. You can kind of see the pixels there. Well, two things. We go back to our layers here. We can delete that layer, create a new one, and change the size of our paint layer. So if I go type in terrain and change the size from 2K to 4K, and then click on the terrain button, and I'll hold S, hold S, right mouse click and hold. I'll press W to bring up my wireframe, and I'll click on the use tiles. I'll hold S and scale it down a little bit. So this is just like a smear. You can use multiple layers to create your terrain. So it's just a dirt map. I'll press Q to hide this. I'll bring my camera back down. And I'll press W to hide the wireframe. So now you can see that the quality looks much nicer. Okay, the second option is to go back into Google, go to the Tools button, change the size to large, and then type in dirt texture seamless. So these images now are like 1K maps, which is going to give you more resolution. That's like 1600 by 1600. It's a high res image. That's 300 by 300. That's 1600 by 1600. And I'll save image as. I'll call this dirt texture 2. And with this diffuse terrain, I'm going to turn that off. I'll upload that second dirt texture 2. I'll click on it. I'll press Q to hide it real quick. I'll press W to see my wireframe. And then I'll press Q again to bring it back up. Alright, so I'm holding S and dragging it to see the size of the dirt. And I'll create a new diffuse map, and I'll call this dirt 2. 4K map, and press OK. Alright, almost done. Okay. Now I'll press Q to hide that, and then I'll press W to hide my my wireframe, and you can see that looks much better than the other texture map. Again, my camera is going to be about this angle, and the textures are going to look really nice on here. If I zoom in, like on my screen, you could see that the texture quality looks really good. Okay, so there are other elements that you can add to this particular terrain. Right, you can, I don't know if it's a Martian planet, so I'm assuming it's going to be majority like dirt texture maps. This particular texture map is like wood, so I wouldn't use wood. And the dirt map that we have right here, this second one, where are you at? Let me turn the tiles off. You can see that the color values are slightly different. So when you paint two different like dirt maps, you want to be conscientious of the color values of them side by side. You see, it doesn't really work. So if you're looking for different types of dirt, make sure that the color values are the same, or that you change the values like in Photoshop, which I'll go over a different time. So the next tutorial will actually gather lots of reference images together and paint the entire terrain. But right now this is just a quick overview of how to take your terrain from Maya, UV map it, bring it directly into Mudbox, and how to add textures. If you're using more than one diffuse or one particular color map, I would suggest that you create multiple layers. So let's say this is going to be a grass layer, and I paint grass on top of it for whatever reason, right? I wouldn't paint grass on a Martian desert, but if I paint grass on top of this, having a grass layer will give me the opportunity to like change how much of the grass I see, the strength of it, kind of like Photoshop layers. You can do like dissolve or darken or multiply, or a lot of the same Photoshop methods are built into this particular software. So you can use a clone tool, so I can clone parts of the grass over here. So I'm holding control and clicking on my source and then painting that. Alright, there are lots of other tools that I would love to go over, but for the sake of time, we're going to stop this tutorial right here. So please like, subscribe, and comment on this particular tutorial.